Hello and welcome back for another presentation in your World Regional Geography course. This time we're going to discuss Middle America. Alright, well let's get going. Now, to introduce the realm. Middle America has a variety of landforms, volcanic islands, mountains, and beaches. Now, tectonic action along the Caribbean plate has provided this realm with most of its beautiful landscape. Now, we often divide this area into two parts, as observed in this diagram on the right. The first one is called the rimland, which includes the Caribbean islands and the coastal areas of Central America. Now, as it pertains to agriculture, was really the dominant source of income and survival in these areas. The plantation style was what was observed. This was due to the excessive amount of trade, because you have access to waterways, but also because since you had access to waterways, many different regions got involved in slavery. Now, the mainland, which is connected here to the United States, that includes the interior of Mexico and Central America, as it pertains to agriculture, which again was a very prominent piece of its success, was known as the hacienda style. And that's mostly because they did not import goods. Hacienda style is more of your ranch style, where you kind of produce for your community. You weren't dealing with shipping yards and stuff like that. Now, the European invasion impacted Middle America in more ways than just language and religion alone. They introduced horses, donkeys, sheep, chickens, and many other animals, as well as crops that were not, native to this region. Now, lest we forget, things that were also introduced would have been architectural design and disease. As I speak with architecture, I've provided a couple examples of the ways that we observe urban planning. As we can see in predominantly Middle America and Mexico, we often find these models that were brought over from Spain, in which you have your market or your central town plaza being the middle, and then everything kind of branching outwards. And I think a great example that's local to where I am would be Alvarez Street in downtown LA, where you have in that central piece, that market, a very large gazebo where people sell goods and trade goods, and then wrapped around it you've got your different locations, churches, stores, shops, places to live, and things like that, but really have that central piece. Now, going back to, way back, it is believed that Middle America had a population of 20 million people, and just a decade after the Spanish invasion, only about 2.5 million of those people were alive. Now, people have lived in Mexico for thousands of years. One of the earliest, the Olmec, was from 1200 BC all the way through 400 BC, which is believed to be the precursor to the Great Mayan Empire. The Mayans lasted from 300 BC all the way to 900. Then the Aztecs took political and power and control after that until the Spanish invasion, which lasted between 1519 and 1521. Now, looking more at just kind of present day information, looking at our population density as well as the topographic relief, we can see, again, looking at are there correlations where population stands as well as a relationship with the topography. We will talk a bit about this in a moment. This mountain range, it runs here all the way down into South America. It's the longest mountain range in the world. But we do see that there are populations that live on either side. We find that most of your population lives in this area here on the Caribbean side, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Obviously, we can see the peninsula that's here as part of Baja California. But again, take into consideration population density, also the topography, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you can make correlations within that. Now, let's talk about Mexico in particular. So Mexico is the 8th largest country in the world. It also has the world's longest, spelling error, I apologize, longest peninsula. It's about 775 miles long, and it's part of Baja California. Now, the Tropic of Cancer does cut Mexico in half, dividing it into two very different climate zones. They have then temperate and then tropical. Many of Mexico's natural resources lie beneath the surface, such as copper, gold, lead, zinc, and iron, and many others. And what's important about these is that these are very, very important exports for us in the United States. I've also included a photo here. These are the famous gypsum caverns in Mexico. If you haven't checked that out before, you need to check that out. They're beautiful. They're gypsum crystals. That's a little person for scale. Now, although Mexico is rich in resources, over 40% of that entire population in Mexico lives in severe poverty. Illegal drug trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry, which includes cocaine, marijuana, and heroin, and drug cartels have now moved on to even very different types of trafficking, looking at the industry of the avocado and the trade industry within the United States. I've also included this diagram here, which are things that we've talked about before in this class, but looking at the United States and Mexico, we have, Mexico offers cheap labor, peripheral low-income migration to the north. United States has opportunity advantages, markets, and jobs. So it's a very, when we look at even population densities in the United States that were brought in from Mexico, we know that it's all within the Sun Belt, within California. We look at Arizona and even Texas as being some of the greatest populations of individuals from Mexico. But what are they all bringing? Is they're bringing in that very cheap labor that drives our economy. We want cheap labor so we can charge 99 cents for a head of lettuce. If everyone was paid the legal minimum wage, lettuce wouldn't cost you 99 cents. There'd be a cost difference. And those are things to think about when it comes into economic geography. Now, moving into Central America. Central America is a land bridge connecting both North and South Americas. It has high mountains that run the length of South America through Central America, and they're part of the longest mountain chain in the world. About 50% of the population in Central America lives in rural zones. Now, in the late 1900s, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua experienced devastating civil wars, which divided their people and destroyed their economy. And in fact, we even still see some of this persisting today. I just picked these 4 locations to speak about kind of what other people identify them as. El Salvador is known as the Coffee Republic. Honduras is known as the Banana Republic. Costa Rica is known for their microchip manufacturing for the United States for computers. And then Guatemala is known for its agriculture. So also on the right-hand side, I've got some of the location and place names, including the Panama Canal, which is mentioned in a couple other videos with the importance of the Panama Canal opening. Also, you'll read about how many people were involved in that and where the people came from to build it, and also what architectural designs were the result of that in California, being the Spanish style bungalow. But anyway, the diagram on the top kind of shows the different elevations that are prominent in Central America. As you can see, they have elevations over 15,000 feet, which is taller than our Mount Whitney here in California. But we can see what grows well in these areas. You can see at sea level, you got bananas, sugarcane, rice, and other tropical crops. Just at 2,500 feet, you're looking at sheep, cattle, dairy, and some veggies. A little bit higher, barley, grazing, potatoes, so on and so forth. And then just grazing because you get to the tree line, and then nothing up there is just snow. Moving forward, we can look at the Caribbean. Now, the Caribbean basin is often divided even smaller into 2 smaller pieces, known as the Greater Antilles and the Lesser Antilles, which means islands. Now, colonization was not limited to just Spain. When we think about the Spanish Inquisition and the moving in, the British, Dutch, French, and even the United States has had their hands and ownership in many of these areas. The largest of the Greater Antilles is Cuba, which plantation agriculture demanded an immense amount of labor, which was mentioned earlier, and unfortunately required them to acquire a tremendous amount of slaves. And that was really between 1800 to 1870. What's interesting now is that about 70% of Cubans practice some aspect of Santeria, which is a hybrid religion from Africa and the indigenous people of Cuba. Other things that I thought were interesting would be the steel pan drum is the national instrument of Trinidad and Tobago, as they are created using 50-gallon drums. This was a huge musical influence in the 1960s, along with reggae, which came out of Jamaica, which is interesting because this is music that was born in those regions, from poverty in the sense, and how it transitioned into a music style that is heard around the globe. Moving forward, we also can talk about what's important about Middle America is the devastating nature of tropical cyclones. Tropical cyclones develop just north and south of the equator in the Atlantic and the Caribbean, and these storms are often called hurricanes. They develop over oceanic water that's about 80 degrees Fahrenheit and warmer. In doing so, it causes that air to rise rapidly through the heat, and that warm air will cool with altitude condense, resulting in extreme weather. If the storm develops north of the equator, it will rotate counterclockwise. If it develops south of the equator, it will spin clockwise. Be sure to check out my other lecture video on extreme weather, and I explain a little bit more about how these operate and how they work. But nonetheless, the speed of these storms in which they spin is used to classify the intensity of that storm. So I've got that up in here. So we can see that a Category 1 is between 74 to 95 miles an hour. But if you're looking at something that's 131 to 155 miles an hour, we call that a Category 4. This diagram in the bottom right is from your text, where it kind of just explains, we're talking about this area here. So we can see that there are hurricane seasons between June and November. And what's important to mention is that we talk about these hurricanes and that they're incredibly devastating to these regions. Even just things that affected more recently, looking at places like Puerto Rico. These massive hurricanes come through and they're completely devastating, providing stagnant water, which can then turn into a health concern, and just the devastation itself is quite immense. And most of these areas, as we said before, a majority of the people are in poverty to begin with, and so it's very expensive and almost impossible for them to recoup and to rebuild, especially when resources are limited. All right, so let's test it. So here's some questions. Middle America has two distinct patterns that emerged with European colonialism. The second one is, what type of natural disasters often devastate human activity in Middle America? The third one is, what is one of the newest important economic sectors in Middle America? And the last is, hurricane season is when? If you haven't liked the video yet, be sure to do that. Don't forget to subscribe. And let's talk about these answers. The first one is, Middle America has two distinct patterns that emerge. What are they? Well, we've got rimland, which is plantation style, and mainland, which is hacienda style. What type of natural disasters often devastate human activity? Well, we know those are going to be hurricanes, but we've also included earthquakes and volcanoes because of the correlation with the Caribbean plate. What is one of the newest important economic sectors in Middle America, and something that many of us have taken advantage of? Tourism. Ecotourism is huge. Just think about what they're able to offer. When you think about people that are in poverty and just the value of the dollar, it's worth a lot more down in places such as Mexico. And so, tourism is some exotic type, fad that we enjoy to go visit these, very beautiful, different environments. And tourism is a huge piece for them, which is interesting to discuss when looking at things like pandemics. Like when you have complete shutdown of certain areas, when they are solely based on tourism, how will they push forward? Now, obviously, some of the rural parts in Central America are still doing agriculture. That never stopped. But what about the hotel industry and the tourism industry and things like that? I mean, it's not just even hotels and clubs. I mean, we're talking about just the tourism of locations, visiting ancient ruins and artifacts and museums. And when is hurricane season? It's from June 1st to November 30th. Again, I hope this video was helpful. Don't forget to click like and subscribe, and hang on tight. We've got a couple more coming this way. We'll talk soon.